Would you love to get started with painting? Well, stay tuned because I've got some tips on what oil paints I use and acrylic paints I use in my studio, plus some very important tips on how to get started. Hey there, it's Nicola from nicolanewman.com, the place to visit for inspiration to flourish in your garden, business and creative life. And today we're coming to you from my new art studio. It's finally finished and we've been painting in here and setting it up with new furniture, and I'm also very excited because we've set it up with some beautiful lighting where I can have a studio, a film studio, to be able to make new videos for a series that I've wanted to do for years called Q&A with Nicola. In this series, I'm excited because I'm going to be able to answer your questions about anything from painting to gardening to things to do with business. And I'll tell you how you can submit a question at the end of this episode. But to kick us off, our very first question came from Maria via my Facebook page. And Maria was asking which brands of paint I use, what I use them for, and she's looking for some basic tips of how to get started. So thanks, Maria, for your fantastic question. It's a great idea to get started right back at the beginning. Now, before I dive into talking about the actual brands of paint that I use, I wanted to give you a couple of tips about paint in general, namely the difference between acrylic and oil paint. I use both acrylic and oil paint in my practice, and there's a couple of things that you need to know about them in order to get the most out of them and make sure that your paintings last and don't crack and fall off. So number one, your acrylic paint is made basically having little tiny bits of pigment of colour that are suspended in a mixture of water and a polymer emulsion. So it's kind of like a glue. And being water-based, the water evaporates out of them and forms a film which makes a strong layer that holds the pigment together. It's like colour that's suspended in glue, essentially. Whereas oil paint is pigment, similar pigment, but it's suspended in linseed oil usually. Sometimes it's walnut oil, but usually it's linseed oil, plus some other additives such as resins and another type of binder to help hold the pigment together. But the difference with oil paint is it actually oxidizes. So that's the difference between oil and acrylic paint. One's a water-based and one's oil-based. Now, when it comes to getting started, it's important to know that you can paint oils over the top of acrylics, but you can't paint acrylics over the top of oils. Because oils take a long time to dry, anywhere from a couple of hours up to a couple of months, depending on how thickly you paint, then it's important to always paint them on top of any acrylic paint because the acrylic will dry very fast and the oil paint needs to still keep being able to move. So as long as you remember that A comes before O in the alphabet, you'll know that acrylics have to come before oils. Plus, when you want to start a new oil painting, it's really important that you make sure that your canvas is primed or sealed with acrylic paint first. So you want to paint it with gesso or some white house paint even will be fine. As long as it's acrylic, that will seal the canvas and stop the oil paint from eating through the cloth and eventually forming holes, which obviously you don't want. The good news is that most canvases you buy from the shops these days come already primed, and you can just choose to paint either acrylic or oils on top, no problem. And as long as you do that, you'll be perfectly fine. So there's two main types of acrylic paint that I like to use, Maria. And the first might be a surprise. I actually like to use house paint. I use high quality house paint for underpainting under a lot of my oil paintings. I love it because it's affordable and it's easy to cover a large surface very quickly and get some color down, get the creative juices running, and it's lovely to feel abundant with lots and lots of paint. So you could buy some sample tins from the hardware store, or you could buy your favorite colors in the 2 or 4 litre tins in bulk. The second type of acrylic paint that I like to use are golden paints. Golden paints are a professional acrylic paint that have a high density of pigment in them. So they go a long way. A little bit goes a long way with golden paints, and the vibrancy is amazing. You can get colours in golden paints that you simply cannot find in house paints. Plus they're light fast, so they'll last for decades, and they're just a real pleasure to use. They come in both fluid forms, so very runny, watery sort of paint, and you can add more water to that and it gives you some watercolour effects. And it also comes in a thick impasto style, so you can paint quite thickly with them, or you could add other mediums and make it bulk up like an impasto style paint. Now, oil paints are my absolute favourite type of paint to work with, and they took a little while to get used to, and I had to learn a few tricks to master them. But once I found out how to mix them with mediums and how to clean my brushes easily, I found that the effects that I could get with oil paint were just beautiful. The layering and the translucency and the time that they give you too to work with the paint, because they are slow drying, so you can wipe them off easily, you can reapply things, and you have a time to adjust them that you just simply don't get with acrylic paint. Again, with oil paint, there's two main brands that I work with, and the first is the Montmart Professional series of oil paints. I love to use these for bulk painting. So if I'm painting very thickly, or if I'm working with opaque colours, I find that the Montmart Professional series really covers all bases. It's affordable, it's light fast, it has a beautiful buttery consistency, and it's very accessible. You can find it at some discount stores, you can find it at lots of art shops these days. Where I find Montmart lets me down sometimes is they don't have such a good range for transparent colours. They're great for colours that you can't see through, very dense blues, whites, reds and yellows. But when it comes to some of my favourite colours, those are made by a brand that we tended to use mostly at university, and that's Art Spectrum. Art Spectrum I love for their Australian red gold, their olive green and their Payne's grey. Those three colours are really, really important in my colour palette, and I always buy them from Art Spectrum. So in summing up, there's two main types of paint that I use. There's acrylics and there's oils, and within those two types there's two brands that I like to use. And in acrylics, I'll sometimes use house paint just to get down some colour underneath my oil paintings. And you could also do the same. You could buy some house paints and then you could finish them even with a high quality artist's varnish, and that would protect your paintings for a long, long time. You could also use the beautiful, vibrant, luscious colours that are found in the Golden Paints range. And when it comes to oils, you've got the Montmart Professional series and the Art Spectrum. If there's one thing that I've learned about painting and playing with paint, is the value of experimentation. And there's some colours that I adore and that really work for me, and they work only in one particular brand. Or there's other colours that just really don't suit my style, but I've only discovered that through trial and error. So I encourage you to get out there, find some colours that light you up and that you feel drawn to and you want to play with, add them to your collection and just have a play. Push some paint around and see what happens. So Maria, that's my answer to your question. I really hope that it gives you some inspiration and ideas of how you can get started with painting, perhaps with oil paints or acrylics today. And I'll include the links to some of the paints that I love on the Products I Love page at nicolanewman.com. And now I'd love to hear from you. Have you tried any of these brands? Is there another brand of paint that you love to use? I'd love to hear about it. Come on over and join the discussion at nicolanewman.com, and you can leave a comment now. And do you have a question that you would like answered on Q&A with Nicola? You can submit it to info@nicolanewman.com. Did you enjoy this video? I hope so. If you did, feel free to subscribe to my YouTube channel, share it with your friends, and if you want even more great resources to help inspire you in your garden, business and creative life, come on over to nicolanewman.com and make sure that you sign up for my email updates, in which I share sometimes things that I only share in email. Listen to your heart, Carve out time for your creativity and be gentle with yourself because life's more fun and fulfilling that way. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time on Q&A with Nicola.
Flourish with Painting and Creativity is coming up. Would you love to learn how to paint? Would you like some free tips and more info? Go to paintingandcreativity.com.
Painting, Peter Piper, pick a paintings.